Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Nice to see you all in person. I know we've not seen each other in person for a long while, so it's great to see you all here. Thank you very much also for those that have joined us on stream today. Really appreciate you being here. There is a chat function in that stream, so if anyone is encountering any issues with audio or sort of visual quality, do let us know and we'll do our best to resolve that for you. Just before we kind of pass over to the speakers here today, just a bit of housekeeping for the people in the room. So if anyone needs comfort breaks, there are toilets just down the stairs that you've kind of come up into this room. And we're not expecting any fire drills today, so if an alarm does go off, please don't panic. We will be kind of shown the safest way to leave this building. And I suppose just kind of a very, very brief introduction from me. My name is Matt Welsh. I am the Strength and Communities Manager at Essex County Council. Our team is part of the Public Health, Wellbeing Communities Directorate at the Council, and our team is kind of the team that's been quite involved in the development of this kind of communities campaigns model, this kind of new approach to civic digital infrastructure. And it's really great that you've all kind of come along to hear more about that today. Also take the opportunity just to introduce you to my wonderful colleague Neve at the back. Neve, give a wave. If you need anything from us today, just give us, either of us, a nudge and we'll do our best just to kind of help you out. So conscious of time, and there is quite a packed agenda today, so what I will do is I will pass you over to our first speaker, and that is Lucy Whiteman, who's our new Director of Public Health at Essex County Council, and she's here just to kind of introduce herself and provide a few opening remarks for today's session.
Afternoon, everybody. Lovely to meet you, and apologies first because I feel like a bit of a fraud, actually. Hello. I'm so new to Essex that actually I'm still very much learning what's happened during the pandemic, how big and complicated but wonderful the voluntary and community sector is. And so I'm here just as much to learn about what you've been doing and what your aspirations are for the future as I am to kind of be a keynote speaker, because that feels a bit fraudulent, to be honest. But my background originally is community nursing, so I was district nursing for a number of years, and really practically, I genuinely have used and understand the value of community sector organisations, have used them to support a range of patients for their sort of wider socio-economic needs, their personal needs, their sort of, even religious and various other needs. And it's a massively underappreciated and underestimated sector. And one of the things that obviously we're really keen to understand is how we can, digitalise some of these services, but we do still also need to recognise that that's not going to reach everybody. So this is about sort of multi-channel approaches and making sure that obviously we are understanding people's needs and how they wish to access support. But as I said, I'm really not a keynote speaker as opposed to just saying hello and introducing myself. Hopefully I'll be able to get a chance to speak to some of you individually. But it is really, really important that we acknowledge just the huge role that everybody played, both in the pandemic, but also recognising the opportunity. And it sounds awful, but you don't want to waste a crisis. We need to be able to make sure that we're actually maximising the opportunity that the platform that created for our voluntary and community sector organisations to step up and support and demonstrate the value that they add is obviously continued post-pandemic as well. So please do reach out to me. I'm still very early in post, very much getting to know the patch and the players in it. But I'm very, very pleased to be here, and hopefully we'll get to speak to some of you this afternoon. So Matt, if I hand back to you, but please do come and grab me it's from when you've got time.
Thank you, Lucy. It's great to have you here today with us. So again, just moving on to the kind of agenda, as I say, it's quite packed today. Conscious though that not everyone here is going to know all about our brilliant community campaign model and the outcomes and the things that it's delivered. And I'm sure that our colleagues here from Phirst today will also be able to share that insight. That's kind of the principal reason we're here today. So just to kind of help set the scene and provide a bit of context, I think what we'd like to do very quickly now is sort of explain how it kind of came about initially, kind of the journey we're on so far. And, the best person to do that for us actually is Kirsty O'Callaghan, who I'd like to invite up to the stage next. to talk a little bit more around kind of where it started, her role in helping develop the model, being instrumental in commissioning this initially for us, kind of background to it starting through the pandemic and how it's kind of evolved and developed to address new societal issues around climate action and social isolation and all the rest of it. So if I'd like to bring up Kirsty O'Callaghan to the stage, and she'll tell us more about the model in action in preparation for the next part where we talk about the evaluation of the model.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here today and to see some really familiar and friendly faces, I hope. My name's Kirsty O'Callaghan. I feel a bit like the artist formerly known as Prince. I now work across in the integrated care system as Director of Community Resilience, Mobilisation and Transformation, a title that really just trips off the tongue really, really easily. So like all good stories, this started with a lost dog. When I joined Essex in 2017, my then boss, Dr. Gogarty, asked me to do two things. One was to try and find a way to address social isolation at scale, and the other was to try and find a way to start to deliver public health interventions differently and in an impactful way. So I fell off my chair, thought, how on earth am I going to do this? Because we just don't have a joined up system, and we just don't have the money to reach people where they are at scale through communities of place, purpose and interest in a way that would be really, really meaningful and tackle the issue in the way that Mike really wanted it to be tackled. So I was on the way to my grandmother's funeral and we got a call, we're halfway up the A1, and a neighbour said, your dog's gone missing. I was kind of like, okay, what are we going to do about this? Panic, obviously. But not much you can do when you're in a car, miles and miles away from home, is it really? So we put a shout out on the local Facebook group, which is run by John Mortar, who was my first partner in crime with this work. Within about 45 minutes, 500 people were out looking for Martha. And this continued throughout the kind of weekend. British Transport Police, farmers, you name it, etc., etc. And the community came together around something that it cared about in a place that resonated with them. Martha was found, by the way, so that was all good 3 days later. But what that told me was the power of digital communities to move the needle from digital into physical social action where people care about their community and the things in it. So I got hold of John, who I was at school with, funnily enough, and said, I'd really like to work with a social media hellraiser to start mapping VIPs. And those VIPs are digital community leaders, our Facebook group admins. So we started that work, and I think we mapped maybe 650 now in one group. And we started to think about their power as community builders and what that might mean for the future. So we started to train those admins in mental health first aid. We started to provide micro grants, small things that make a really big difference in communities, that created a halo of trust that would then get those folks wanting to work with us. And that was all amazing and great. And I thought, oh, lovely. I'm going to have a little bit of time and we can just settle into this quite gently. But no, rewind to 2020. And I think we all know what happened. The gates of hell opened and we needed a way to get messaging out to communities really, really fast in a way that resonated with them across three pillars of inform, prevent and assist. So inform being keeping the public up to speed with things that were happening, assist recruiting volunteers and just providing support to our CEV population. And prevent, making sure that those public health messages were really getting out there to drive behaviour change. We're the first local authority, in fact, the only local authority to have a community partnership with Facebook themselves, which really helped in this instance because they enabled us to authenticate Essex coronavirus action, which was what it became. I found myself working with a satirist, a social media hellraiser, lovely Neil over there, who's former CLC leader at Facebook London, and a lady who's not here today, Emmy McCarthy. And what we did was we created an interface between the public health team and the community itself. It was like opening the gates of hell, because literally the first night we set up that group and page, I think we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people joining, and I called Emmy in a complete panic saying, oh my goodness, what have we done? And I called Mike and said, oh my goodness, what have we done? And he said, just keep going, be brave, not perfect, it's all good. So we started to formalise the model, which is the community campaign model, the steps that you see up there, which I'm not going to talk through too much today. I can share slides and further information on that if you want to. The group grew really quickly to about 60,000 people, with a page that I think started to reach about 6 million news feeds each month. Simon will correct me on that. We ran this project through a really simple Facebook Messenger group with our public health colleagues, with our Facebook admins, with other interested experts. I can see Shalale and Russ over there, particularly looking at things around legal support and CAB type support. We started to use it as a way to get the messaging that we needed to get to people out there. We couldn't afford the level of marketing that would then build a community that this model afforded us. So what we started to do from there was to apply this model to other thematics. You can literally apply this to anything. Green issues, mental health issues. And I guess I'm super excited to see where this goes next. So having left Essex and gone across into the integrated care system, we're going to be using the model to apply it within our strategy to building our primary care networks, to building communities of interest, purpose and place around our stewardship programs. So this project has changed the way that we will do business around engagement and community building probably forever. It is not the only way of engaging communities. It is not the only way of building community, but is something that can amplify and work really, really, really well alongside our traditional and highly impactful voluntary sector partners. Why it works is we work with a group of influencers whose creativity and brilliance never ceases to amaze me. It really doesn't. So pat on the back to Neil, Simon and John over there for just being brilliant. Because this is not embedded in a local authority or in a statutory service of any description, because it is a collaboration, it is a model that is owned by the admins themselves. What this means is, in terms of narrative, we can develop tone that is a lot more relevant, that is a lot more engaging and resonates really effectively with communities in Essex. During the pandemic, we were asked by the DH to do a compare and contrast piece of work, to look at their messaging, put that out, and then create our own, which Simon did rather brilliantly, actually, using a tone and narrative that would resonate with those hyper-local communities. In every single instance, it was more effective, usually by an awful lot, than the traditional corporate messaging, which absolutely we still need. This is not a replacement, but what it is just a really impactful and different way of doing business. Thank you so much for having me along today. I'll continue to work with you all in a slightly different way, in a slightly different place. I'm going to hand back to Matt now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. That was a very brilliant and eloquent way of describing what has been quite a crazy last couple of years. So thanks very much for joining us today. So hopefully that's kind of set the scene and provided some of that context in terms of kind of why this started and how it sort of developed in the last couple of years. And that will therefore lead quite nicely into us sort of now sort of introducing and sharing some of that learning and evaluation from our Phirst South Bank colleagues that are here today. So there's a bit of background. Whilst this model's been kind of live and developing over time, we've been really fortunate to work with this team of people to help develop some very robust evaluation and learning from this model. And we're hoping that today this will kind of illustrate some of these opportunities that are available for engaging with kind of communities, our voluntary sector, you know, just people of Essex and kind of beyond around kind of social issues. So what I will do now is invite our colleagues to the stage just to share to share their sort of learning and evaluation around this piece. This will be the kind of main presentational element of this, so it looks to be really exciting, really looking forward to seeing more about it. Will all you guys be coming up to the stage together? Great, well, thanks very much. So I will allow you to introduce yourselves, but thanks very much for joining. I look forward to hearing more about it.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Susie Sykes. I'm Professor of Public Health and Health Promotion, and I lead the Phirst South Bank Centre at LSBU. So I'm just going to do a little bit of introduction before I hand over to my colleagues from Phirst South Bank, who are going to talk through some of the findings from the evaluation that we've been working on. Does this clicker work? Do I have power or not? I do have power. Great. Okay, so that's us. So just to give you a bit of background about who Phirst South Bank are, we are an evaluation centre, public health evaluation centre, funded by NIHR. NIHR set up originally 4 centres around the country. They've now expanded the initiative and 2 more centres have been created. And they established these centres after identifying a need to provide support and capacity to local public health teams in evaluating their local public health interventions. So we've been funded for 5 years, and over that 5-year period, we will be working with 10 projects across the 4 nations to support the evaluation of local initiatives. And Essex put in a bid to be one of the projects evaluated, and we were matched by NIHR. We were allocated this project back at the beginning of 2021. So it's really great to come back today, and I just wanted to say thank you for hosting this event, because having started working with Essex back in January 21 and doing everything online and via Teams and so on, it's really great to be in a room together and to actually talk about some of the findings that we've put in place. So the centre that we have is an interdisciplinary centre that brings together academics from across 5 research centres at LSBU and draws together skills and interests from across a whole range of disciplines, which I think is really important because it mirrors the types of interventions that we see in place, trying to tackle the wider determinants of health across local authorities, not just within public health departments. So 2 core principles to the way that we work are co-production and public and patient involvement. So we are not in place in order to kind of helicopter in as outsiders and carry out an evaluation and then leave again. It's very much based on the principles of working with the local intervention to understand what's being carried out, what the goals are, and what the expectations are, and then to design an evaluation in conjunction, in partnership with the local stakeholders, and that's very much what we've tried to do with our partners in Essex. And that at all stages as well, that we build in public involvement so that we'll have public and lay members of the group that's building the evaluation design, but then throughout the implementation of the evaluation, so that we have that kind of public voice there advising us and ensuring that what we're doing is responsive to the users of the service or the intervention that we're evaluating. And with public involvement so embedded within this model of work, that wasn't difficult to achieve. So that's a little bit about Phirst South Bank and who we are. In terms of how we worked, having been introduced to the partners in Essex at the beginning of 2021, we ran a series of workshops over a 2-month period, 3-month period, where we really spent a lot of time with the local partners trying to understand exactly what it was that you were trying to achieve and how it was that you hoped to achieve those things. So we carried out a lot of kind of workshopping time where we tried to dig down into what are the goals? What is the difference that you're trying to make here? And how is it that you're trying to achieve those goals? What is it that you assume will happen as a result of what you're doing? And that enabled us to really understand exactly what was happening, but also what we needed to find out so that we could jointly come up with an evaluation question that was going to be useful for local decision making, but also hopefully filled a knowledge gap that would be useful for the wider public health community, so that we're hopefully producing findings that aren't just relevant to Essex, but that can be transferred to other people that are thinking about working in this way, so that some of those lessons can be shared more widely. So we spent a lot of time working together until we had a question, and then a design and evaluation plan that we hoped would be able to answer those research questions. So this is what we came up with. We broke our evaluation down into a number of different kind of sub-questions, if you like. So we framed the intervention as an online community development approach during the pandemic. And what we were interested in is whether or not the digital community development approach that was being adopted improved a number of different health outcomes that have been identified as being important. So we've got there health literacy, protective health actions, community connectedness, and mutual aid as being important outcomes. So that was part of what we were looking at. And then, sorry that I'm reading these, I can't remember them off the top of my head. And then another area that we were interested in is whether or not the digital community that came through the ECAS project was successful in achieving some whole system changes towards public health communications and interactions with communities. But importantly, we weren't just interested in those outcomes, we were really interested in the factors that would contribute towards the achievement of those outcomes. So that we're interested not only in what works, but why it works. And if there are areas where it doesn't work, why might that be as well? So from that, we were able to come together with an evaluation design, and I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in a minute because they've got far more interesting things to say about exactly what we did. But basically, we had a combination of both quantitative and qualitative methods that would enable us to dig down into those different areas of the evaluation questions. So my colleague, Professor Daniel Frings, is going to talk us through the first two areas of research that we undertook, which was a primary analysis of survey data, so survey data collected through the Facebook users, but also through other users of Facebook, and a social network analysis. And I'll let Dan talk through exactly what that entailed and what that told us. We also carried out a sentiment analysis of the Facebook interactions, and my colleague, Dr. Megan Watkins, is going to talk through what we found out about the sentiment and the meaning of some of the language. And Megan also worked qualitatively by carrying out a discourse analysis of the conversations that were taking place on the group. So I'll let Megan talk through how we did that and what we found from that. And then finally, in order to understand the systems side of things, Professor Andrew Whitaker carried out some qualitative research with different stakeholders. So staff, public health team, and the wider environment around the actual group. And so at the end, Andrew will talk through his findings. So I'm going to hand over to Dan, first of all, and he'll talk through his findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Okay, so so we've got two different separate packages of work we're going to talk about here, one of which is a social network analysis, where we looked at the structure of the group, and then also these set of questionnaires which explored what people thought was being affected by the intervention, and we attempted to try and find out why. So we'll start off with the social network evaluation. So what we did here was we took two time periods, one of which between, step back, sorry, 26th to the 3rd of 20, so in those opening weeks of the pandemic, and then a second one at the first few weeks of the lifting of the first lockdown. And what we were interested in is the structure of the group at those time periods, what they looked like, how it was structured, but also how those things changed. So the way that we explored that was by manually coding a set of days from each of those. I think we looked at a 2-week period from each of those periods, and we had someone go through and manually code who said something and who they said it to. So by the end of it, we essentially had a big register explaining who had talked to who and who had replied, etc., etc. And we can use that and then map it to see what the structure of the group looks like. If you are interested in doing this yourself, actually you can do it all with open source software, which I'm a big fan of, R in particular. It's all there, it's all available for free. You just need to kind of get your head around it. And once you've done this, you can do some really interesting kind of visual and also quantitative mapping, which we'll describe now. So here what you can see is the time one, that first time period, the first few weeks of the lockdown, and we can see the blue dots there are essentially all the different people who said something, and we have some yellow dots, which are the groups. So that's the group, that is actually when people are sending messages to the group, and then we have the red dots, which are our administrators, and don't forget these are peer administrators. And what you can kind of see from this pattern is that there's a lot of discussion, but it's all really centered around in clusters. So essentially what's happening here, if you translate this to what's going on Facebook, is people are having, someone's putting on a post, everyone's talking about that post. There's not that much interaction between the community in terms of different posts. There's not that many links between those different clusters. We can kind of describe that in terms of the sort of ties that people have, and they could be described potentially as having what we call weak ties. So this is that people are all connected, but they're not connected in a really cohesive kind of way. They're kind of connected by association. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. It's quite common in social networks that are online to see these weak ties, and it suggests it's very good at communicating information, but perhaps you're not building an amazingly cohesive community. Okay, it's a community of people with stuff in common. It's a community of people who are maybe affiliated with one another, but often by association rather than directly. Other things to note from this first time period is that the admins were playing a relatively small role in terms of the proportion of communications that they were both a source of and a target of, around 2.7%. And the network connectivity was quite high at 90%, suggesting that basically everyone was connected to one another. And you can see this in most of the communications, people are indirectly connected to each other. There's just a few, those little dyads, the little pairs on the outside where people aren't connected to the main network. So that's what we saw at time one. At time two, we saw some things were fairly similar, but there were also some quite significant changes. So you get the same basic pattern. You've got clusters around particular posts. However, there are some really notable changes, and one of those, which I think is particularly interesting, is that the admins feature a lot more heavily. So they've gone from being around 2.5% of the target, being the target of the communication, and around generating around 2.5% of the content in terms of the number of posts, up to around nearly 1 in 5 of those interactions. So it seemed like in those opening phases, in the first few weeks from the lockdown, those community administrators were playing a lot stronger role than they were early on. We also see a slight drop in this transitivity, which is this idea that the friends of my friends are my friends, the extent to which people are linked to other people as well. And that is, as we'll see later, can be, some people argue that that's an indicator of indirect trust as well. So it suggests that there was something changing in the community as we went along. Maybe people were talking a bit less to one another perhaps, but the admins were really becoming an important focal point and important influencers. So to sum up what we the overarching conclusions from our social network analysis, it appeared that the ECAS network really did bring together people in terms of communication. The sort of network that was there was one that we would characterize as being very, very good at transmitting information. So it certainly seemed it's very successful about from that point of view. In that first phase, the network was really driven by the community. That was what was going on, all those interactions between community members, but the administrators seemed to play an increasingly prominent role as we went through. We also saw, as I've kind of noted already, that transivity decreased a little bit, which is linked to this idea of how much you trust people you don't know in a network. And I think that's really something to think about, is how do you keep that level of indirect trust up, and how do you keep that level of community momentum going. Really important to note, though, of course, our administrators in this instance are part of the community. They are those peer influencers as well. So it's more that it kind of shifts rather than diminishes, I suppose. So that's the findings from our kind of social network analysis. It's really interesting. There's a new set of methodologies to us, so it's quite enjoyable getting to grips with that. And I think some interesting insights into exactly what that community looked like in terms of who was talking to. Our second data pack I'm going to talk about today is the survey we did. So these surveys were linked in time. We asked people, we used the survey platform, and we recruited people either who were involved with the ECAS intervention, either using the page and or the group, and then we recruited another group of Facebook users who lived in Essex but had no contact with ECAS, so they couldn't recall seeing it, they couldn't recall interacting it. And that was the best we could really approximate for a control group in this instance. And then we got them to think about two time periods. The time period now, or when they filled in the questionnaire, and also the time period in the past, which matched on to that post-lockdown, the lifting of that lockdown period. And what we're interested in is exploring we're interested in exploring the extent to which people understood the ECAS intervention as being owned by the community versus the administrators. We're interested in seeing whether or not it had an impact, if it's efficacious in terms of people's awareness about COVID, their health literacy, and their change in behaviour. We're also interested in the extent to which it impacted this community champion activity, people stepping outside of the online world and having action in the real world as well. And this model here, you can see the boxes, the diagram, the mediation model, that was generated as a logic model in collaboration with the ECAS team, and that drove the way we designed and implemented the survey. So starting off with engagement with the site, what you'll see is that actually fairly good levels of engagement. So many people using, about 3/4 of people who just use the page, saying they're on there for around less than 10 minutes a day. The other 25% suggesting they're using it a bit more widely. And then people who are using the page and also the private group. So this was a group you could join where you would have slightly more maybe peer-to-peer interaction, people using that a lot more. So you see just over half of the people using it for more than 10 minutes, and a fairly significant number of people using it between half an hour and 60 minutes a day. So it suggests there was a good level of engagement. In terms of ownership and confidence, the majority of people that we spoke to saw the ECAS intervention as being a reliable source of information they could be very confident in, and also one that they would be prepared to refer other people to. So it's suggesting that people saw this as a legitimate source of information, and one that they were prepared to refer others to off the site, so it's having that impact beyond the site. We also looked at ownership as well, and this was one of the results I was really pleased to see actually, was that actually many people saw that site as being owned by the community at large, by the administrators, and also by public health. So that sense of joint ownership was there, and you'll see there's a little box that marked others there, and those others were typically other local health or local government organisations as well. So that sense of joint ownership was certainly experienced by people, or certainly perceived by people using the group, which I think is really encouraging, and a strong argument, I think, for widening the use of this more broadly. Our conceptual testing was looking at the extent to which interaction with the group had these impacts on health literacy, COVID preventative behaviour, and community champion activity. We didn't find the links we expected there. I think in this instance, it's probably because we were asking people to think back retrospectively. So in this instance, I think I would argue that an absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. We'll talk about some findings in other parts of the project that suggest it was efficacious in those areas, but we didn't pick it up in the survey. We did, however, find some really interesting information about who was using it. So it appears that the ECAS group members were people who were maybe a little bit more anxious, a little bit more concerned about COVID, and also feeling a little bit more isolated. So in terms of reaching groups, I think that's a really interesting finding, that the people that were using it were possibly the people who really needed it. There were people who were feeling a bit concerned, didn't really have any links they could perhaps talk to, and this met that need. So I think that's very, very encouraging. And what we found, as you might expect, between the opening weeks of lockdown and then the time when we did the questionnaire, that people's anxiety had dropped, and it had dropped more or less equally in both groups. And I think that's probably unsurprising given the uncertainty that was there versus when we collected the survey a few months ago. People are a bit less anxious. It'd be interesting to see what's kind of happening now as we go into that endemic phase and see what's happening there. So overall, to kind of summarise what we found from the survey, the ECAS group was really relied upon. It was seen as something that could be used as a legitimate form of information and could be referred. Good levels of engagement on the whole, but particularly people who were actively engaged with the group rather than just the page, and that probably reflects the fact that was more interactive. It was seen as that joint ownership was that was aimed for was very present and seemed to be quite important to people in terms of it being seen as a mutually held thing rather than just a one-way form of communication, and particularly used by people who maybe needed it the most, those feeling a little bit isolated and those feeling particularly anxious as well. And just to reiterate, we didn't find those significant differences between the people using the group and not in terms of those key outcomes around health literacy, COVID behaviour. But I do suspect that's something to do with the retrospective nature of the study. And we'll move on and talk about some other evidence which presents a different slant on that those null findings there. So with that, I shall hand over to Megan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Watkins. I'm the Research Fellow for the Phirst South Bank Centre. It's been really great to work with you all on this project. I'd just like to open this section with a quote from an author of a book called The Hype Machine, as we start to reflect on why interventions and evaluations such as this are important and the implications it could have for all parties involved. Social media platforms blame our ills on a lack of regulation. Governments blame the platforms for turning a blind eye to the weaponization of their technology, and the people blame their governments and the platforms for inaction. In the end, each of us must take responsibility for the part that we are playing. Today I'm going to be discussing the use of the ECAS online community for public health messages during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we used discourse and sentiment analyses to look at both admin and group member interactions. So I'll be providing an overview of the methodology we used, the findings, and some implications. So I think it can be useful to think why something like psychological discourse analysis might be useful with data such as this. It allows us to understand how meaning is created in our talk. It draws on many disciplines, so things like psychology, sociology, and linguistics. Some people do say it's best suited to naturalistic data as opposed to contrived data. And by that, I mean something that might be largely researcher-led, like interviews. So the analysis we followed was a framework set out by Goodman. So in this framework, appropriate research questions are decided upon, and then the data selected. And during the preliminary reading of the data, there's a search for what we call action orientation. So what's actually being achieved in the discourse. And then in order to generate results, there's a search for interactional and rhetorical devices. And we also call those discursive devices. And we use those to build a case. So I think something that's worthwhile to consider is, in order to do that, you do need to have an awareness of the vast discursive literature. So our data was divided to code between 3 researchers using the qualitative software in vivo, and that's after we established that we were coding in the same way. In a similar vein, I think it's also worth thinking about why something like sentiment and linguistic analysis might be helpful here and how it's conducted. I think one of the great things about this as a methodology is it allows extraction of vast quantities of information through computational assessment of different word categories. Of course, we should bear in mind there are limitations to its predictive accuracy, which is why I find manual monitoring of the data also useful. It's a very fast-growing area and has been used quite widely in things like product review and also social media analytics. So we analysed the text files from periods of interest using the software linguistic inquiry and word count. And that works by calculating the degree of use of certain word categories. And for this evaluation, the focus was on dimensions relevant to the research question and also for the discourse analysis too. So we were looking predominantly at affect and cognitive processes. So I'm sure group members and admins might be thinking of the thousands of posts on the ECAS group. We did have time periods of interest for our analyses, and for these, we searched the ECAS group for relevant months and interactions for the specific periods shown on the timelines were manually extracted, and our interns did a really great job at helping with that. So we identified these salient periods on the timeline through our co-production workshops with the ECAS team, and they spanned the first, second and third UK lockdowns and some interim periods where restrictions were eased or in some cases a stricter tier system was imposed. So discourse and sentiment analysis can help illuminate information from these periods in terms of the strategies used to communicate public health messages, in what way were people encouraged to practice protective health actions and COVID-19 safe behaviour. We can look at the devices used in the discourse that helped achieve a sense of online community, and how language, indicative of social, cognitive, and also affective processes, changed over the course of time. So several social actions appeared to be achieved in the Facebook group interactions. So as you can see, in the first few months in particular, the group seemed to provide a space for members to voice dissatisfaction and discontent with circumstances. In particular, there were issues raised around government policies, difficulties with priority shopping, I can see some nodding there, and shielding letters too. So this led to group members seeking a lot of help and clarification to address areas of confusion. And at that point, shielding remained a topic of concern, and also travel-related issues, such as MOT exemptions, emerged. So at that point, formal public health guidance started to come into place, and you could see that was communicated by administrators and to some extent group members. And I think that's reflective of new regulations coming into force, and at that point there was perhaps less uncertainty about the anticipated restrictions, including guidance around social bubbles, self-isolation, and information about actual COVID-19 cases. There were several ways in which identity was established in the group. For example, group members were presenting themselves as reasonable and were aligning with other such members. And in doing so, they were dissociating from those seen as obtuse or provocative. For example, rule breakers, anti-vaxxers, or conspiracists. And that collective identity is something that may have facilitated the group working towards a shared understanding about group expectations, and also a greater understanding of people's experiences of COVID-19, symptoms, and isolation periods. There were instances of the group finding solutions together and sometimes navigating rather ambiguous guidance. Provision of support arose through group members offering reassurance, words of sympathy and encouragement. And this particularly stood out to me in terms of long COVID symptoms discussed. So whilst there was this general movement or a progression in social action, by no means did these social actions operate exclusively at certain times. In terms of the discursive devices used to help achieve these social actions, admins used several different strategies for communicating public health guidance and also providing support. And these included things like use of factual formulations, polite but instructive language, and adverbs. And this all served to provide clear information, signposting, and also answers to people's questions. Admins authenticated their role, sources of information, and the self, and that helped to present discourse as credible. A shared understanding was promoted by admins within the group, and desirable group characteristics were reinforced using several devices like face-saving expressions, which can be used for reputational defense of the self and others. And different levels of modal verbs were used for hedging and affirmation. So that can include words like should, can, and maybe. And we also saw rebuttals used to present counter-arguments and dispute the validity of assertions when needed. Group members used a variety of discursive devices too, in order to provide support to one another, to convey dissatisfaction, and communicate public health guidance whilst seeking clarifications. So, for example, mental state language was employed, which is indicative of thoughts and emotions. Group members also employed authentic personal narratives, and we saw some cases of self-disclosure. And devices such as confidence expressions, words of encouragement, exclamations, and also idioms were used as different ways to offer and elicit empathy. So to put these discourse analysis findings into context, I think these findings are important, considering that authenticity has been linked to things like persuasion, interpersonal relationships, and effective communications about health. Generally, infrequent use of expressions related to people's thoughts, emotions, and beliefs has been linked to some difficulty with implicit mentalizing, which we might see as intuitive interactions. So there is quite a lot of literature on face-saving discourse too, and the literature offers different models around reputational defense. Attributing positive motives to someone else might act as a form of politeness, but it can also preface disagreement or criticism, and it's perhaps not surprising that less prominent language associated with reputational threat can avoid conflict. So I'd just like to turn to the complementary sentiment analysis findings now. So there were negative correlations between chronological time in the group and use of anxiety, anger, and positive emotion words. And there was a positive relationship between time and use of sad words, but these relationships weren't significant. There was, however, an interesting, significant positive relationship between time and insight, authentic, and relativity words, in particular, words related to motion and space. So to put this into context, use of emotion words was likely attributable to temporal events. So we might expect, for example, a greater use of anger and anxiety words around holiday seasons, and that would likely be heightened in the midst of a pandemic. But it's it's worthwhile to think that actually language emotionality can extend beyond emotional expression. And there was some evidence in the group for a development in thinking style and an increased social awareness. So authenticity has been linked with discourse of close friends, less social inhibition and monitoring. There are also links between insight words, such as think and know, and health and well-being. And there's some suggestion in the literature that greater use of relativity words, which could function to increase description and specificity, might indicate greater attention and functioning too. So importantly, these sentiment analysis findings appear to be in line with, and I think strengthened by, the discourse analysis. And in these findings, the value of the part that we are all playing becomes a lot clearer. I'll just hand over to my colleague, Professor Andrew Whitaker, now for the next section.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Yes, I'm Andrew Whitaker, and I'm a professor of social work. And I had the pleasure there of leading on the qualitative part there, doing the interviews there with the core team. So it actually was a real kind of pleasure, so partly because it actually was a really fascinating initiative, but also it's great to actually be able to spend time and actually have resources there to look at something there where it's going right. If you're in local authority and somebody is interviewing you in order to ask what you did and why you did it, it's usually because something's gone wrong. So that actually and often we actually have lots of resources, reviews and inquiries, so that we learn about, from what goes wrong, so that, it never happens again, all that. But it actually was nice when, things actually were going right. And we actually need to learn every bit, it's a real opportunity there to learn about, why was it actually going right, in order that we can, to be able to actually apply that to other areas. So actually doing interviews there with everybody that actually had a significant involvement, both actually within the public health, both within the local authority and the actual social media influencers, the kind of admins there, and then also within the wider public health team who weren't involved with the initiative. And we're looking at that kind of question of how did it work? But what I actually would say there is that Dan and I did our research completely separately and didn't actually, at the time there, I wasn't actually aware, that actually had, there's very nice things looking at about, we were kind of pleasantly surprised by looking at the extent to which actual people felt a sense of ownership to the group. And about, almost 90% there were trusted what was actually kind of there. So actually these are really kind of positive things, but I wasn't aware of that, because we did it completely separately there, so we didn't kind of influence each other, kind of turning up there and sort of saying, tell me actually kind of why you were so successful, so it isn't quite the rigorous objectivity required for an NHR research project. So what was clear in terms of the intervention was that one of the key aspects that was actually about that really genuine collaboration. Now, the idea of public health actually using kind of social admin there, well, actually kind of lots actually of kind of public health teams actually have done that. What actually was special actually about this was about that idea of community building actually in there. So actually was that about, and the effect that actually has in terms of engagement. And one of the ways of looking at, that question, how do you actually manage to get 90% of people to actually kind of trust what you were kind of saying? Well, the actual idea of social capital can actually be kind of quite helpful in terms of understanding that. And that's just actually is about, well, in terms of those kind of partners, what resources do they bring along? So from the local authorities' point of view, what we actually was bringing along actually was a relatively small amount actually of economic capital. A lot of it actually was about symbolic capital in terms of that reputation. And so symbolic capital, imagine there that tomorrow a leaflet comes through your door. Well, if that information leaflet there has actually got NHS stuck on the top of it, well, you're much more likely to actually be able to trust that, because actually the NHS has got that symbolic capital. See, and the local authority has that as well, but what people are actually saying is one of the challenges actually is, in terms of actually local authority, is that sometimes people can actually have either a sort of local interpretation of that, which is you can either quote, people don't love the authority, they really don't, they think we're all about dog poo and potholes and taking your children away. So that actually is the kind of the local version. Or there was the idea of actually the everything's all mixed up, which actually is the kind of sense there of when people talk about local government and national government, they tend to actually kind of think, you got a second quote there, yeah, lay members of the public don't necessarily see a difference between local government and national government. Yeah, quite a lot of it just seen as all this kind of government body. So actually as a local authority, you've got real kind of challenges there about how you actually engage people. Yes, you've actually got some symbolic capital, but actually, you actually need more than that in order to really engage people at a genuine level. And this actually is where the social media, local social media influences bring along their social capital. And by this, we're talking about their actual network. The network there in terms of based upon recognised individuals, local symbols, a sense of local references. Yeah, having actually material on there that actually talks about kind of Barry the Seagull, say it from kind of Southend, is something actually there where people who actually are able to, on there you're seeing people talking about kind of getting stuck at kind of in a traffic jam at Rayleigh Weir. These are the kind of things there that, people actually will kind of feel, it's a kind of social capital that once you actually do, once you actually combine those two together, that really actually can be quite powerful. See it? But actually, you've actually combined those two. But the challenge is actually from that is that for each party, there are kind of challenges in terms of threats actually to their kind of capital. There are different forms of capital. So for the local authority, in terms of that symbolic capital, there actually is that concern about reputational damage. So there actually is that kind of sense of, yes, when we actually get stuff about kind of Barry the Seagull, oh, wait a minute, this isn't something there that corporate comms would actually do. So from local authority, kind of naturally kind of feel a little bit kind of, have to manage their anxiety in terms actually of that kind of, reputational kind of capital. But also actually for, local media influencers there that actually have, their own established kind of reputations, that they actually have their own kind of communities. There is that kind of risk there in that, well, I'm going to be just seen actually as a sort of mouthpiece of the government. So actually kind of there's real powerful advantages, real strengths there in terms of combining those two, but each of the parties need to be aware, that also kind of there are anxieties that creates for both parties. So, and it actually is, the actual about that kind of good leadership is absolutely kind of essential. And essentially kind of what you actually need is actually senior kind of management buy-in. Say what Kirsty actually was saying was about, yes, kind of, what was it, kind of be brave, not perfect. But then actually at a kind of intervention level there, what you actually need is somebody who also is sort of bilingual, bicultural, that in a way kind of understands actually kind of social media kind of culture, but then is also be able to actually kind of engage actually with the local authority in terms actually of, kind of managing the anxieties that there actually may be in terms of things like, reputational damage. So in terms of the opportunities and risks. Now, within the wider kind of team, one of the things we almost involved with the project, one of the potential kind of limitations, potential challenges is about what often gets talked about in terms of echo chambers. Oh, wait a minute, in terms of social media there, is it just actually kind of, echo chambers there where, you actually have got a self-selected sample that, may not attract people there who, for example, aren't actually concerned actually about health risks. Well, within the actual core team, they accepted that to an extent, but they made some really interesting points. The first one there is that this isn't actually kind of unique among, in terms of social media kind of communities. This actually is what you actually get across all social communities. You know, the same issue there about being a self-selected sample. You know, if you're looking at alternative networks, for example, the voluntary sector, you actually have got exactly the same issues. That's it. Secondly, that ignores the fact that actually kind of group members actually may be there and they actually may be concerned and they're engaging and they're kind of, but then also they actually are, you know, their members actually have families. So people can maybe on there and say, oh, I'm really concerned about my nephew there. You know, he's actually talking about kind of conspiracy theories and he doesn't actually want to get vaccinated. And so actually was a forum there where people kind of could come on and then get support in terms of actually having those conversations, you know, with other kind of family members. So actually, and the third one actually was that, you know, if you're looking at particular groups, like say, for example, kind of teenagers that have actually got no kind of, you know, concerns about that, well, you know, okay, you know, there are other forms of social media. So, you know, having something like, you know, doing something actually on kind of TikTok, you know, say actually would be something that would actually make a lot more kind of sense. So there are other more targeted interventions. So what were the features that were associated there in terms of efficiency? Well, really important there actually was about the responsiveness, the actual speed at which this actually was coming together. So that, you know, in terms of actually, if you're looking there in terms of, you know, traditional kind of comms and, you know, that actually there are lots of, you know, you're not going to get the kind of agility that you actually get in terms of something like this. Also, people noticed there in terms of consistency and moderation, being able to manage kind of conflicts. So actually were something there that actually is really essential. You know, being able to produce actually understandable and attractive content. So that people can again talked actually about, you know, the really good, the really attractive and really kind of organic content. This actually is kind of content that actually being generated, or actually was kind of quite remarkable. The warmth and kindness. Yeah, so the idea of empathy. If you actually are trying to actually kind of create a community, so, say the traditional kind of model in terms of public health using social media would be, we've got our message, we're going to get somebody in with kind of social media skills in order to deliver it to our audience. In a pretty similar way than if you were using TV or you were using radio. This very much actually would be, you're looking at a very kind of passive audience. You know, when I actually asked one person there, it was about what's the difference between actually an audience and a community? And actually as well, in terms of an audience, all of the chairs are facing towards the stage. And you as a local authority is you are broadcasting out. In a community, the actual chairs are facing towards each other. That people are actually having a relationship with each other. That actually kind of makes that difference. And in there, you know, that kind of empathy, that actually kind of that warmth was such an important part there in terms of creating a community, just like in any other form of kind of social community. That being authentic and honest also actually was important. Yeah, so kind of people actually would come on and say, you know, kind of, what about, ask questions. And actually the importance of just being honest and saying, we don't know, you know, so the information isn't available yet, you know, so it will tell you as soon as it is. Well, something there that actually, again, it actually is an important part of that how do you actually build that trust? Drawing upon evidence in order to correct misinformation. And often that would be actually about, you know, here actually is this kind of website. And about, you know, kind of the, and challenging actually kind of, you know, some of those ways in which, you know, you'll see there in terms of social media that people actually will say, you know, don't trust that article kind of from the Lancet, you know, because that's the elite trying to actually kind of just actually treat you kind of like sheep. You know, trust this because it's been, you know, trust this information here because it's been retweeted 100,000 times. You know, it's very much actually there about challenging that, you know, actually in, you know, an accessible way. What she was really important about was about, you know, the key individuals involved that actually played a very important role in terms of actually this. And actually about, you know, kind of the importance there about, what we were kind of seeing there, actually people actually working around the clock. You know, say that, you know, everybody, all social media, admin people, you know, were kind of virtually laughing at the idea of a sort of 95 kind of culture. You know, say they're actually, but you know, kind of there are issues there in terms of kind of, you know, work-life balance. You know, that actually is a really big ask in terms of the people involved. So we need to be aware of that. So finally, there, in terms of what were the lessons learned. So what's key actually is about this genuine kind of collaboration, between the local authority and grassroots social media admins, rooted actually in the local community. And that involves actually both parties actually taking risks, about avoiding actually being kind of risk averse. It provides a viable alternative there to a traditional kind of broadcast model, where, people actually very much conceived that she is an audience. But also, we'll say is, what was kind of clear, people saying there was that this actually way of working actually is a amplifier in terms of kind of traditional comms. It's not actually kind of replacing, kind of traditional comms. So actually kind of addressing some of those fears of like kind of from comms point of view, wait a minute, are we being replaced? No, this actually is amplification. Requires risk and strong and risk tolerant support from the local authority. About understanding those two cultures. And key there actually is about having really experienced social admins there that can generate this really high quality material that actually is that actually also actually has that kind of hyper local kind of flavour there that people can relate to. Ensuring a healthy work-life balance is an ongoing challenge. Most difficult during the crisis periods. And finally though very much developed actually in the context actually of a pandemic, there actually are, particularly felt that intervention had good potential to address a wider range of issues. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, just to pull that together then, thank you to my colleagues for all of the work that they've done on those work packages, because that is a huge amount of research that they've undertaken with a wider team of researchers from the university. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. We have got a kind of a summary of some of our findings, which you'll find on the table, so do take one of those. But just to kind of pull together some of the key things from across those work packages, some of the key kind of, the significant take-home points that we'd like to leave you with. I think that this issue around the shared ownership of the group that was created and the building of the community is really important and has come out across those work packages. And also that within that space, the dependable source of information was really, really valued and was particularly reaching those people that were socially isolated. So I think that's a really important kind of take-home message. And also that the nature and the character of the social network intervention and the interactions that took place changed over time and are likely to continue changing because of the context within which they took place, and that is not always predictable, but that the role that the admins played in managing that change and throughout the intervention is really clearly central to the delivery of this as an intervention. So thinking about that role and how it's supported is really important. But that what the group offered, what the intervention provided, was that social contact, and that is obviously key in this, and that crucial in that role was that sense of helping people to navigate through a time of confusion and obviously high levels of concern. So obviously we're looking at this in the context of the pandemic, but that was a changing environment. So what we see is this two-way relationship, and I think that is perhaps what makes this unique, that this dissemination of information is happening via this two-way interaction, and I think that is what makes it different from other forms of media and is the potential that it offers. And as has already been said, as Andrew just said, and as I think Lucy started us with, is that this is something that exists alongside other public health interventions and can support, complement, and amplify other forms of communication and public health interventions. And I think that's really important to understand, that nothing exists in isolation. So people were clearly optimistic and felt that the intervention had potential to create empowerment amongst communities, but that also had the opportunity or the potential to kind of shift systems changes and create a new way of working. And I think people were very clearly hopeful that this would be part of that kind of change. And I think finally that the challenges that exist are there. They're very clear challenges in delivering in this way, but that it also provides promise and potential for working in other areas. And what we're really keen to see happen, and what I hope we can start a conversation around this afternoon, is not only answer any questions that you have around our findings, but also have a conversation about how you might use those findings, because I think that is at the heart of Phirst South Bank and how we work. Obviously, we are academics and we're fascinated by all of the data, but we're also see ourselves as part of the public health community and want to see that what our findings do is to affect change in practice. So we're really keen to kind of start that conversation. And I think we've tried to kind of signpost to recommendations throughout the presentation, but there are some kind of key ideas that we'd love to talk to you about tonight, this afternoon, about how you can actually use the findings. And I think some of those are thinking about if this intervention is continued or replicated elsewhere, thinking about how those admins are selected and supported, and thinking about what skills are needed from those kind of key pivotal stakeholders within the intervention is really important. And navigating through this sense of kind of shared ownership and ensuring that that is prioritised, while also maintaining the degree of self-moderation within a kind of a controlled environment where that messaging still has to be factually accurate and clear. So that kind of navigation is really important. And thinking about the strategies that have been mentioned throughout today's presentation that I think have been demonstrated within this intervention, and that would need to be kind of the learning from which needs to be captured if this is to be rolled out. So those strategies that were used by the administrators, the language that was used, the way of managing potential conflict, all of those strategies I think are ones that we need to kind of capture and learn for in rolling out this project elsewhere. And I think that the points that Andrew raised around the need for generating warmth, around honesty, reciprocity, but also that kind of the key leadership that's required to kind of take this forward, I think is the skills and knowledge that this has generated that does provide the potential for it to be replicated and transferred to other issues beyond the pandemic. And we'd really love to kind of begin a conversation with you about how you might do that. So thank you for listening to a long presentation, but we really wanted to take this opportunity to kind of unpack in detail with you exactly what we found. We will be kind of writing papers and publishing the findings. And as I say, we have got this kind of short report, which we thought might be more useful for you as well. So do ask us any questions. Matt, I think we're going to a break now, or are we taking questions here?
Yeah, so as a speculation rather than a data-driven kind of response, I think it is difficult to disentangle. It was almost like the world's biggest complex health intervention, wasn't it, right? So how do you ever pick out a part? I'm not sure you ever can. What we can say from this is that it was meeting the people with social isolation. They were certainly getting reached. It was reaching a wide demographic in terms of scale, quite cheaply. So I think those are the things we can kind of demonstrate as those things happened. They are things you could directly compare between different interventions, I suppose. In terms of that generalizability, I think there's something about finding the fertile ground to plant those seeds of community. So if you can find identities where people do feel a sense of connection, it is an identity which is important to them. It may not be one that's valued to them, it may be one that they don't want, right? But nonetheless, there's enough there to get a sense of some social tie with other people. That's probably where it's going to get traction. And I would imagine most health or social issues. I'm a social psychologist by training. That's my identities on my whole thing. So that's why I'm going there. There's always going to be some identity stuff going on that you can tease out and amplify. So first question was, don't know, can't completely disentangle it, but at least we can pick those bits out. And the other one is finding the space that's there already that is likely to thrive in, I think.
I think you've raised, so many interesting points there, and I think important to that is that each time this model is potentially picked up and used in a different context, I think what I'm taking from all of the findings is that while there are threads that can be transferred, that context is going to be so important. But perhaps in the same way as when you work in a real community setting, the different community that you're working with and the different health issue that you're addressing will always influence the way in which that model is delivered. And I think understanding the context has got to be key. And I think that kind of mapping around the issue and around the community to understand how they want to direct that has got to be really central, I think.
So generally, we saw the Facebook group initially providing that space for people to express that dissatisfaction and discontent with circumstances. And I think the utility of that in itself is really important, because if the group hadn't have been there, people wouldn't have been able to convey that at all. And that was what then was able to elicit things like empathy and support, which you were interested in. So whilst this discourse and this sentiment was operating in the context of a crisis, in terms of the support, that learning, I think, is very transferable. Do you have anything to add?
Just to come back a bit about Susie's point about context, I suppose one of the biggest differences between COVID and everything else was in COVID, there was an online context, and that was basically it, right? Because no one was outside, no one was doing anything. But moving ahead, you've got this really interesting situation where what people are doing online and the intentions that they're forming and the triggers to turn those intentions into action and those behavioural changes and all that sort of, all those things that have been driven by that community, or the aim was to drive them in that community, can actually now play out in the real world. So there is that leverage type thing.
Just going to bounce off that. So in the literature, we do see that actually use of anger language is predictive of how people are feeling in their day-to-day lives, and that relationship with anger is more so than a lot of other emotive words. So I think that's quite interesting in itself.
So anger is a action-orientated emotion. It's something when you get angry. So when you get maybe a bit down or depressed, you would tend to withdraw. Where with anger, on a physiological level, it activates all the same kind of processes as doing something, and then it also generates behaviour. Doesn't always generate the best behaviours, and of course, if you're setting an intergroup situation, because effectively what you're doing there is you're setting up an intergroup context where you've got, the corporation or the government, the legislative framework or whatever, versus us. And that has some other impacts as well, that it's going to change the way people see both of those groups. It's going to change the way they behave towards people who break the rules in groups. So they might be actually quite, when people when group status is under threat, which is what you're kind of doing when you create the anger, people are much less tolerant of rule breakers. So there's going to be all these other things. It's not just get people angry and they will go and do something. They'll also do a bunch of other stuff as well.
It's a cool question, but I'm just really interested in the demographic that you reached. So obviously one of my concerns that I voiced at the beginning was, Facebook is a brilliant platform, but it's a platform that only a certain sector of our community engages with. So, and did we also see people deliberately engaging in Facebook for this purpose where they hadn't done previously?
Sorry. The anger side. Just thinking about the anger question, actually, sorry, that's what I had my hand up for in the first place, is there were two situations where we were dealing with anger that I can think of over the course of both the page and the group, and the whole time that it was running. The first one, I think one was slightly more positive than the other. Christmas 2020, when, for want of a better phrasing, Boris cancelled Christmas, which obviously he paid the price one way or another. But the situation that we had was, we spent the whole run up to Christmas constantly talking about, you can do this, you can't do this. You can do this, but you can't do this. And then all of a sudden, one fateful Saturday, I believe it was, Boris, Chris Whitty, God, I forgot the other name. And the other Professor Balance. That's it. Yeah. They all get up in front of the nation and say, "Actually, sorry, if you live anywhere south of boom, it's not happening Christmas." And the way that we dealt with that is we basically didn't put up a post saying, "Look, it was this, now it's this." We did a very sympathetic post and used the word "crap" in a piece of public health where we said, look, we know this is crap and you're angry, and we told them that we were angry. And it's something that we did across the course of the whole project, is that if we thought something happened that people were going to be angry about, we didn't just jump in and say, look, sorry, but do this now. No, that wouldn't have worked. We literally said, look, this is crap, but this is why it's happening. I mean, that particular weekend on the Great, there must have been, Emmy would be better source for this, but there must have been about 5,000 odd questions that came in that we couldn't allow them all up. But it was literally people saying, well, can I do this now? Can I do that now? But at least when we used that word crap and said, look, this is crap, and we put the word crap highlighted as well, this is crap, people generally got on board with it, I think, a lot quicker than if we'd have said, look, sorry, you could do this, but now you must do this. No, we said, look, this is crap, but this is why it's happening. And we talked about the rates going up and the risk to your health or the risk to your loved ones and stuff like that. And that generally got people on board with the idea a lot more than if we'd have gone in and said, this is the new situation, deal with it, basically. And that's what we did across the whole project. We kind of positioned ourselves not as the government or the council. We positioned ourselves as with you, the audience, and that basically worked. And that's where we used anger to good effect. Where we had to be a bit more careful is when we were talking about rule breaking at the beginning, we were generally saying, look, please do this. And, please, even as much as we were sharing the police information, saying, look, if you want to report somebody for breaking COVID rules, this is these are the people to get in touch with. And we very quickly realised that wasn't getting people on board with what we were doing. So in the end, our messaging about anger changed, where if people got in touch and said, I've just seen 200,000 people on the South End seafront, how dare they? We ended up putting out a lot of messaging saying, look, we know you're angry, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not helping your own mental health, your own situation. And, there was a time when we were getting a lot of queries saying, oh, I've just seen X, Y, and Z doing X, Y, and Z. And people were sharing photos and people doing this and doing that. And we said, look, we just ended up stopping any kind of naming and shaming content coming through and just put a blanket thing up saying, look, these are the people you get in touch with if you have any concern, but we're not going to have a debate about it on our page or group, because that anger was spilling over constantly and it was detracting from what the group was there to do, basically. So if that's a slightly long-winded... Sorry, John, do you want to...
Okay. Okay, I'll pass it around. Just regarding your point regarding did they join Facebook specifically, I think we did see a lot of people in the group, didn't we, that did actually say, that they've come along on board because this is where it's at, this is happening. However, which I think, are we still doing a bit? We've got a bit in a minute, aren't we? So I might as well say it here anyway, but we also created an Instagram, Twitter as well, because there's thousands on Twitter, thousands on Instagram that won't go near Facebook. So we've got to cover all bases as much as we can. So yes, this is very heavily Facebook centric, and understandably, because that's where the big numbers we had came in. You can't ignore others that don't want to go near Facebook. So, which was primarily more my role, to make sure that those people were covered and that we made sure that they were okay. If I can quickly say, actually, just regarding your point, regarding the creation of something where we can rally against it, that's actually initially how I got involved in the first place, because I raged against Simon Cowell many years ago, and that got me into this business. So, thank you, Adrian. I love you too. Wasn't expecting love, but that's good. But on a serious point, that's a method I've used for many, many, many years. Is that sometimes you have to use these methods, and you have to have the bad guy and the good guy, and so on and so forth, and you can apply that to different. You can apply it to different things in social. And again, we were quite lucky, and I use that term really, really carefully here, that COVID was the bad one. It was obvious, you couldn't mistake it. And so what we tried to do is we're all on one side here, we're all one team. Yes, that includes the council, which some of you lot over there don't like because it's the council. So, and that's kind of what we try and do, isn't it? To try and just say, look, we're actually, without being cheesy, we're all on the same side here, and we're just trying to just make sure that we all come out of this healthy and happy, and at the other side, and we can have a good, chat about it, really. We're kind of like and again, as Simon was saying, where you've got the people and the council, sometimes those two do not, they just think, oh, we don't trust the council, etc. I suppose what we tried to do is be the sandwich filling in the middle that didn't touch either side. And we found there's a big audience. Again, I've done this for years. There's a big audience there that are happy to get involved with that, because strictly speaking, we're not the council. We're just helping you lot out. Do you know what I mean? So that's a big part of this, really. But I've probably gassed on a bit more on that one. Sure, hand this on.
Oh, sorry. So actually, one point I was going to make to you, Lucy, as well, actually, just in general, is that this is why we were so keen to get you on our group and page the other day doing that little introduction video, because over the course of the entire project, it was the occasional appearance of Dr. Mike on our page and group kind of bridged the gap between, who are these people, and yes, they're kosher, for want of a better analogy there. And it was just getting Dr. Mike on there when he had time, because obviously it was absolutely frantic for various reasons, but getting him on there as well made people realise, yes, we're working with the council, but yes, we are on your side. It's such a difficult balance to strike, which is why we were so keen to get you on the other day, just saying hello, because again, we didn't want people thinking that, we're now doing something else. We're still the same project, but with a broader, which we'll explain in a second anyway, but that's why we're so keen to get you there, because it's carrying on that sense of, right at the very top, people are involved in this who generally might not otherwise get involved in social media stuff sometimes, basically.
Right, thanks guys. Just very quickly, I think I'll probably interject there. So I think this kind of segues quite nicely on to the fact that we'd like to have you guys actually talk to everyone a little bit about what you've been doing in terms of your community campaigns, and and firstly, just before we kind of bring you guys up on the stage, I just wanted to kind of thank you, four of you, for that very excellent presentation. It was really useful, and we all learned a lot from it. I think it sort of demonstrates that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this around how we can grow this model to meet different societal issues that we all face, not only in public health, but actually across our organisation and across kind of the various sectors that we all kind of work within. So that was really brilliant, and thanks very much for coming along and sharing that with us. Just to kind of reiterate, there is some exec summary reports dotted around here, and I would encourage you guys to pick those up. They are fascinating reading. The bit that kind of really stood out for me, and this is kind of the clever segue into bringing Simon, John and Neil up onto the stage, is that actually how pivotal the administrators, content creators, the digital campaign managers are in building that trust and those social connections. So I know you guys have already started kind of answering questions and having those conversations, but actually I suppose for the benefit of those on stream too, it'd be great if you'd like just to kind of come up to the stage. I think you've got a few slides prepared to talk to. It'd be great if you'd like to come up. I don't know the three of you, I don't know how you've planned it, but it'd be really brilliant just to kind of share some of your insights with those people that are also watching on stream.
Cool. So, obviously, the main focus of us being here is the question, what are we up to now? Because the whole point of Essex coronavirus action was that at some point, which kept changing on a daily basis, coronavirus was going to go away, even though it never did and it still hasn't now, and the focus would change onto something else. Because the issue is, very quickly, we had a group of 36,000 people on the ECAS support side, and we also had a page with more than 50,000 followers. And of course, as I heard before, never waste a crisis, which I think is excellent way of looking at this, is that we didn't just want to disappear. Essex Coronavirus Action couldn't be called Essex Coronavirus Action forever, so it was just over a year ago now. Essex Coronavirus Action transformed into Essex is United, as you see on your screen, the Essex is United banner, which basically gave us a way of bringing everything together in one great big umbrella of other pages and groups. So Essex is United, your questions answered, as you'll see up there, is the group version of Essex Coronavirus Action Support, because again, over time, questions about coronavirus generally became less of an issue, but people now have questions about literally anything to do with public health, anything to do with the council. It gives us basically the same space, but we can get other people involved should they need to. If somebody comes into the group, your question's answered and wants to know about housing benefit or school transport or Ukraine even, the Ukraine situation in terms of people coming over here who need to be housed, we can very quickly, via Neil, who'll talk about that in a minute, he can get people to answer the questions as opposed to us just saying, here's a link on Google, there you go. So again, actually one group you can't see up there actually is the Essex is United for Ukraine group, which was an offshoot of this work. And Essex is United for Ukraine quickly got a lot of recognition from Facebook themselves. And me and Kirsty were fortunate enough to meet Prince Charles in person a couple of months ago at their new HQ in London and talk about what the Essex is United for Ukraine group was doing in terms of raising funds, giving people a humanitarian outlet to sort out donating, and even get registered for the Ukraine scheme, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, basically. And now it's about a 50-50 split between people in this country, people in Essex who want to help, and also people from Ukraine who are looking for sponsors. I mean, again, every day we get about 30 new Ukrainians joining the group and just posting, this is me, this is my son, we're looking for sponsors in the UK. So again, it's another offshoot of what we do. Essex is Green, which is a page and some groups where we're working in conjunction with the Essex Climate Action Commission to promote Essex green initiatives. And also, we use it as a kind of like a meme-based group, because obviously if it's still, transactional stuff, it tends to fall out of people's imagination a bit. So we use it just to put memes, basically, for want of a better phrase, memes, images showing really good ideas all over the world to try and inspire people to change the way that they live. Essex is Inclusive. It came about as an opportunity to talk about what's going on in Essex to help people with physical disabilities, learning disabilities, and just, again, it's just a way of getting information across. And then, obviously, Neil will talk about the VCS and community support in a second, but we've also got This Is Your Life, which is particularly exciting because it's a collaboration with the NHS in Mid and South Essex. So again, it's just a means of broadcasting whatever Mid and South Essex want to broadcast in terms of the NHS. For instance, it's become a way of talking about the charitable stuff that's going on for hospitals in Mid and South Essex. It's a way of talking about changes to guidelines. For instance, just while we were sat here, actually, I noticed that hospitals in Mid and South Essex are introducing mandatory face coverings. So literally now, tomorrow, we'll be doing a post about that and instantly putting it on Essex is United, because everything comes back to this Essex is United page where we've got this 55,000 strong audience now, just to quickly pump out information from anybody who needs it. Never Too Late Mate, which is a mental health initiative, and it's a really simple one. It's literally just a means of broadcasting. It's a means of broadcasting mental health helplines, a way of raising awareness about help that's available. And again, last year, a lot of NHS authorities in Essex specifically asked to actually use it as a kind of like an official comms channel for Mental Health Awareness Week and Suicide Prevention Awareness Week too. To the extent where we've actually had a load of beer mats printed now with the Never Too Late Mate branding, which are going to go out to pubs soon, where people can actually look at this beer mat with all the various mental health helplines that are available. And also, it raised awareness about something called Shout, which loads of people didn't know about. As in, we found that a lot of people might not contact mental health helplines because they just either don't want to use the phone, or they might be in a situation where somebody might overhear them, that they don't want to be overheard by it. It might be an abuse situation, we don't know. And we literally just said, look, this is a service called Shout, where people can just text and contact a mental health counsellor, a suicide counsellor by text. And people just didn't know about it until we did a post, So it's about breaking down those kind of barriers where people just don't know that stuff is out there. And just one last thing as well, obviously, before I hand over to Neil to talk about groups, is that obviously you guys here may or may not know about what we've been doing already, but also people on the stream too. We're here to broadcast, amplify everything that's already happening. I've already had a chat with a couple of you about this, where if you've got something that needs to be shouted across Essex, provided that it's not commercial, we're not an advertising thing for businesses, that's what we're here for. So it just literally takes a quick email to Neve's department, basically, and then Neve will obviously filter through to us saying, this is going on, that's going on, can we shout about it? So we're there to broadcast what's already happening, which we already do with the CAB in Chelmsford, quite a lot of stuff as well. And some other organisations, like for instance, the fire service, when we get stuff come up on the fire service page, quickly share it. But literally just a quick email to Neve and we will broadcast it, basically, as long as it's not going to contravene any Facebook guidelines, we will forecast it, basically. So if I just pass over to Neil now, he's going to talk more about the group side. I've obviously talked about pages. Neil, want to mention the groups?
I came to the organisation, I came to help be a community manager about a year after it was launched. And I started on the group then, and it was already quite a well-oiled machine. It was already quite working quite well. The tone was positive. And for me, it was, I was very thankful to my predecessor, Emmy, who built the template for the groups, which I kind of followed. And shortly after that, there's a few other groups that were launched. The one that worked quite well, and I think my favourite group, is Essex is Green, which similarly to Essex is United is built around the existential crisis of climate change, very similar to COVID, but obviously much, in terms of impact, probably the biggest subject of our time that we need to kind of engage with. And building on the success of Essex is United helped inform us how we work together with a page, for example. Simon's, have to say, we all came from different backgrounds. I came from a background of running Facebook groups for 8 years. I worked with Facebook on some of their communities themselves, and then I met Kirsty, who'd already launched Essex is United, had this amazing community uptake. There was already 7,000 volunteers that she got through the groups, etc. So doing real social good. And so climate change is something that is another subject that a lot of people are quite anxious about. So, COVID similarly, people are very anxious about it, wanting to know, what to do, who to speak to, how to form groups. And I think the whole process of COVID informed how people reach out to other people in terms of where do we meet people, where do they engage. Well, after 2 years, people weren't meeting anyone anywhere physically. They had to go on, they had to use social media to find information. And of course, climate change is one of those bits of information where, we Google, we try and find people that are similarly minded. And I think we formed two groups, the main Essex is Green discussion group, as well as the sister group as well, the Changemaker sister group. And so the two functions were, this is what we learned from Essex United was that we didn't want to dictate what the group was about. We wanted to be, when there were safe bits of information and reliable bits of data we could pass on to people, because obviously news is changing, we would do that. But we would use the group, would poll the group to say, what do you want from this group? What do you want out of this group? And then this would inform how we ran the groups itself. So we came into the groups quite open-minded, and we wanted the community to dictate what they wanted and then frame how we ran the group around these kind of findings. So people wanted to form their own communities. They wanted information around how to do this. They wanted to find out about local communities that were already established, which we did. We wanted to be amplifiers for what was already going on out there. So as we found out, there's lots of people on the ground already doing impactful stuff in the community, and we wanted to be a cheerleader for that already. And what the thing that I think was probably the greatest benefit of setting these groups up was that, what somebody told me was that because we were neutral and non-politically affiliated, this was often the only place they could come where it wasn't affiliated to either, like, for example, the Green Party, the Labour Party. Lots of community groups were affiliated to official organisations, and us neutral admins enabled the community to take charge of how the community was run. All we did basically is set up a framework where we would set a tone. The tone would always be positive. We would always take on board negative criticism, but as with COVID, climate action needed positive action, and we wanted to promote positive action in the community. So Essex Green has worked really well, in my opinion. It's also happens to be something I'm quite passionate about as well, so that kind of helped as well. But so Essex Green and the Changemakers group, it's been going on for about 2 years now. We've managed to, because we're the wider project of the Essex Climate Action Commission, the purpose of the group has also evolved initially to be a kind of a sounding board for the Commission, but it's kind of taken a life on of its own in terms of trying to promote green initiatives in the community. Similarly, the VCS group that we set up, what we did was initially we set up the groups, we promoted it in the community, got people to join, and then polled those members to say, look, what are the problems? What are the pain points that you have in the community? Can we set up this community so that we can try and address all these kind of issues that we have and get you as a community to kind of help us inform how this community is run? So we would run Q&As, we would feature and be a cheerleader for community organisations that didn't have a platform to talk about what they're doing. And so, like Essex Green, and initially COVID, the original COVID group, we were also learning as we went along. So we didn't want to dictate exactly what the group was about. We wanted to make sure members felt they had some kind of leading voice within the organisation. I think this is probably one of the first times we're using communities to inform, to poll them about, how they feel about topics, relevant topics, etc., and get real proper qualitative feedback from communities about, what's important for them. Whereas previously, I think especially with messaging, people were so worried about reputational damage, about hearing things they didn't want to hear. I think Facebook groups and digital communities offer this safe space where you can honestly get to hear what people are actually saying and allow them a space for them to do that for the first time. And that's the value of these communities, is that this is the first time it's happening where you have a proper dialogue that's open, that's honest, and has real value for it, because you can really find out what people are thinking. And so it's been 2 years. We're changing. Essex's COVID, for example, is pivoting again. Another crisis at the moment is the cost of living crisis, which we soon realised as COVID got a bit quieter, the current massive issue for people living in Essex is, how do I afford my energy bills? How do I afford petrol to get to work? Every day, this is another crisis that's, not invisible, but it's the next big thing that's going to affect us all. And what we want to do is be useful for the community. Listen to the conversations that come up organically within the community, and conversations and questions that were coming up was, how do I afford to get to work? How do I afford to pay my bills? And these were different. These were evolving from conversations around COVID. And we have this important community already. And so this idea of social good it's primary to everything that we do. And to be a voice and to be a safe space where people can come and speak honestly about what's important to them. I believe it's highly transferable, the model, in terms of other areas that is possible to roll out in terms of using audiences to inform policy. But yeah, that was just a quick summary of the last couple of years. John?
Okay. Thanks, Neil. So my role in all of this is, I'll start at the beginning. I had a phone call from Kirsty back in 2017, pulling hair out, going, how do you think we should do this? Have you got any ideas? I went to school with Kirsty. I've known her for about 25 plus years. Our first initial conversation was not the most professional of conversations in the world. It sort of pretty much started with, how the bleeping hell are you going to do this then? So we went for a beer, and we decided that me as a Facebook admin, I admin the South Woodham Ferrers Facebook group, and it's Simon and Neil are both local admins as well, and it's a unique job. Let's just put it that way. So I decided, well, hang on a minute, why don't we bring together other people like me, and we can try and basically just. Very Dr. Evil about it, but we could take over Essex, really. We can bring all of our fellow admins together, and we can just create a good network, and it could be really, really useful. And so I began the process of reaching out to these people, finding them, mapping them. I created a new group of local admins to invite them to join if they wished. But more importantly is it's not just adding them to a group, it's creating friendships, it's creating good working relationships with these people. So I made sure that I did that, and I made sure that I became Facebook friends with a lot of them. I followed them on Twitter, and when COVID hit, it was very, very useful, because when we had our new group, which Simon kicked off on a Tuesday afternoon, I think it was, I could instantly go to the admin for Burnham on Crouch, Denise, who's got 30,000 people that lives in the Dengie, and I can say, Denise, right, we need to get this going now, can you help? Because I'd wished her a happy birthday about a week beforehand, and I comment on some of her bits, she was basically saying, yeah, no problem, how can I help? So straight away, we had the Burnham on Crouch group put our brand new group out and encouraged them all to join. I then went to Ian in Wickford. That's about 25,000 members. Ian's a top bloke. And I said, Ian, can you help me out here? No problem. Okay, so straight away, by doing that and by going around these points of Essex that I'd already not only mapped, it sounds very cold, but these relationships that I'd built up, we could build this group very quickly and scale it up very, very high straight off. So my role in what we do, in what we're doing now, is I still run this group of admins, but as I said, it's a lot more than that. It's not just a Facebook group. It's also, we've got a few people on Messenger that won't go near a Facebook group, even though they admin one. Don't ask me, I don't know. But that's, you get some that don't want to get near another Facebook group. I've got people that, as I said, that strangely enough, we chat on Twitter, even though they run a Facebook group. Again, don't ask. It's probably for you guys to work that one out. But this is the whole point, you see. This is where the networking really, really pays off. And likewise, when we started Essex with Green, I went to some of the green environmental local Facebook groups in Essex and said, hey, look, you know, we've got a new thing we think you're going to be interested in. And it's not, you know, it's not being all corporate. I don't do any of that. It's just, you might be interested in it. And more importantly, some of your users and your own group members are probably going to find this quite interesting, but no obligation. Have a look at that. And if you can share it, that'd be brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll buy you a beer next week. That sort of thing. But it works. That's the key thing here. It works. So I suppose my role is a little bit more, kind of more unique, but it's quite vital in how this thing has sort of got going, really, and I'm trying to keep that going as best I can and trying to stay popular with these people, which, as an admin myself, we're not always the most popular people in the world, are we? So that's quite an interesting dynamic to try and keep. Also, just quickly, I also, because it's not just Facebook, yes, we're very, as I alluded to over there earlier, yes, Facebook is the biggest social network out there, so this is where our focus has been. But as I said earlier, there's a lot of people out there on Instagram, there's a lot of people out there on Twitter, and there's a lot of people out on Twitter that won't go near Instagram or Facebook. So initially when we started this, and I said to Kirsty, look, we've got to go out to other networks as well. And so that's kind of been, by sort of natural selection, hasn't it? That's kind of ended up being my role a little bit, is to make sure that other networks get the good stuff that we're doing as well. And again, it's great. We're getting people from some good influential people on local Twitter accounts as well that I'm now, you know, hopefully friends with. You never know. They say I am, so that's good enough for me. And just trying to keep things bubbling and keep things going so that, heaven forbid, if we do get something, another national emergency or a local thing that we need to deal with straight away, I can then hopefully go out straight to that particular area and say, right, guys, I could really do with your help here. Rather than some corporate institution sort of muscling in and trying to be all matey, and I'm not slating that. I think that's, it's a very, very key audience that they've got and a key job they do. But like I said a little bit earlier, we feel a little bit like the sort of filling in the sandwich sometimes, and I try and act not as a corporate and not as the others, but to try and bring everyone together, I suppose. So that sounds very, I'm in a church, so why not? You know, I might as well say it that way. But yeah, so basically that's I think that's us three on roundabout way of what we're doing now, I suppose. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was really helpful. And I suspect there's probably people in this room that probably will want to have some conversations with you after the fact. So it'd be great if you guys can maybe stick around and do a bit of networking. Neve, could you just push on to the next slide, please? Great. So I think, as I say, it looks like we've run over a little bit. So what we had planned to do after this was doing a bit of an informal table session, just and sort of slash networking opportunities for us all just to kind of come together and have conversations and ask any questions that we weren't able to ask at this point. What I would probably suggest to those that are viewing this on the stream, this might be the opportunity for us to kind of end that there. What we are planning to do, though, is that everyone that's attended in person or on the stream, we're going to share kind of recorded presentation, slides, and the report as well that has been presented today. So there will be opportunities after the fact to ask any questions of us. And I think you've probably got Neve's contact details and certainly share mine as well. So we're absolutely, if there's any feedback from anyone that's kind of participated today, we're happy to hear it. And we're looking forward to kind of having those follow-up conversations. So as I say, what we'll do is we'll have a break now, but actually given the time, what we'll probably suggest is this is just an opportunity now just to kind of mill around if people do need to leave, say thanks very much for joining us. It was good to have you here and it was really insightful. As I say, thanks for those on the stream that have attended as well. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did in the room. So I think that's probably it kind of formally from today's presentations. But as I say, we're going to be around to kind of have any follow-up conversations. There's refreshments, teas, coffees over there still. So if anyone wants to stay and have a couple with us, we're more than happy to have some conversations with you all. So as I say, thanks guys for publishing the report. It was really helpful. And I look forward to kind of reading through that in more detail. So thanks very much for attending all. Cheers.